going, crash again. Just trying some more stuff. Just another story about 99, 98 and Perth.
Arrival at the cafe, the person he was meeting was nowhere to be found, so we grabbed a table, got a coffee, sitting there waiting, in walked a familiar face from years gone by. I hardly recognized his face as it had aged somewhat, looked like the years had been tough on him. It was Sean Wiss, or Wiss as he was known. I, along with the rest of the crew at Hampton Road House, had become friends with him as he lived a few streets away, the same place I mentioned where we had met Sebastian. Wiss back then when we had met him was a lot older than the rest of us by 15 years. He had grown up in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. In the 70s his father had passed, leaving him an inheritance which he had spent on surfing the planet. He had endless stories and photographs. It seemed like he had surfed everywhere, Asia, North and South America, Europe, all over the Pacific Islands. After blowing all office money on travel and, as he put it, bad habits, he had moved to Perth in the mid-80s. He was selling us all some herb back then. He was also using heroin, which none of us at the time wanted anything to do with. Wiz kept his using from us, but we all had our suspicions. Anyway, that was 17 years.
Yeah, so as I said, yeah, this is, running into this old dude and stuff that, yeah, just sort of old stories, but, yeah. I just want to, get the sentiment down of what we were doing at the time, sorry about that. So, this is a bit of a dramatic event that happened to me around this time, sort of led for a time to change my life, sort of after this happened. How much before, I think. Yeah, anyway.
Still in a hazy, almost dreamlike state, just being able to see two police officers over the medic's shoulder, whilst he was saying to me, if you don't come to hospital with us, they may get involved. He sat back down on their stretcher. They loaded me in the back of the ambulance. On the short distance it took the ambulance to drive back to emergency, the gravity of what had just occurred come to me via the medic who had just brought me back. He was sitting in the back of the ambulance with me. Fuck. The look in his eye was one of disgust, bewilderment, saying to me with this look in his eye, you really don't know how lucky you are, do you? You're a fucking fool. I've been to a dozen odds over the last week and you are not coming back. When we first saw you, you were dead, no pulse, not breathing. It took us a lot of work to get you back. I truly can't believe I'm talking to you now. Fuck mate, someone's looking after you today.
Yeah, so... confronted me. Time for a change. So...
Back to Mum with letter in her hand for the ambulance bill. I told her I had overdosed, not giving details, but everything was alright. This to Mum was the last straw. In her mind it was time for some tough love. I had to go. In her mind, if she could get me out of the state, it would get me away from drugs and the people I was associated with. In her words, before you kill yourself on drugs. As mentioned before, Mum had been working on this plan for me for quite a while, which involved going to visit my brother Shane, who was living in, of all fucking places, Broken Hill, New South Wales. Fuck. I was horrified by the idea. What the fuck am I going to do in fucking Broken Hill? Mum replied she never used bad language. Well, more than you're fucking doing here. You're going. End of story. Because your father and I have had enough. You're not living here whilst continuing to use drugs. Fuck, I didn't want to go. Dad was saying to me, you're scared of the real world, which pissed me right off, as in a way, it was true. At the age of 31, I really didn't want to face the world, but I got thinking about the overdose. Maybe moving again might be the answer.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, that was sort of what was happening to inspire me to move on again. But it was, as I elaborate on here, it was just a turning point that sort of I wasn't aware of at the time, but it was. It was better. Things did get better, as they always tend to do. I like to think in life, as we all do, I guess.
After thinking it through, I swore to myself if I went back over east and started using again, I was going to go on methadone. I couldn't bear another round of off again on again sickness. With this in mind, and great reluctance, I agreed I would go. I mean, I was lucky Mum was going to pay for the train ticket. A bit rough on the train, but Mum wasn't going to pay for me to fly. Plus the train goes straight through Broken Hill. Well, the day came when I had to leave. I still really didn't want to go. I had fuck all money. I managed to scrape together one full dole check. Mum and Dad gave me a lift to the East Perth train station, where the Indian Pacific leaves from. Standing on the platform, things started to turn. It was strange to say the least, but very positive. About to board the train, I was saying goodbye to Mum and...
Well, this was I don't know, as I said, me and the old man have had our differences over the years. We had a few years where I didn't even speak to him, but anyway, things do get better. We have got better my relationship with him.
Aboard the train, I was saying goodbye to Mum and Dad. Without thinking about it, I gave Dad a big warm hug goodbye. I had never hugged him before. After this, I got on the train with a total change of mind. I went from being hesitant about leaving to now thinking this is the best thing I could be doing. Moving on, that is. I don't know what changed me in that hug with Dad, it just felt right. I sat down feeling very positive about what was coming. I had no idea of what I was going to do in Broken Hill, but as stated, it just all felt right. Luckily, the train was virtually empty the whole way to Broken Hill. It is still a shit trip in coach class, somewhat better than the bus. At least with the train you can get up and walk around.
And just bumming on about Broken Hill, which I like as a town, you know, an Aussie mining town. Place I've never been before, can always be positive, you know, something different. Even though I didn't.
Arrival at Broken Hill, I'm greeted by my brother Shane and his then girlfriend Donna, although this relationship was not to last. Shane hadn't had a good previous few years, as he had been heartbroken over a personal issue. He had been living in Adelaide when this issue had changed things in his life. To get over this, Shane had left Adelaide and started doing shearing work as a wool classier, which he has done for decades. Now, with two cousins of ours who grew up in northern South Australia, about an hour and a half north of Adelaide in a little town called Moonta. My two cousins were shearers. Their names are Warren and his older brother Stephen, who was commonly known as Bear. They had introduced Shane to a shearing contractor, Pat, who Shane had started to work for around the Broken Hill area. Shane had worked with Warren and Bear but was now working for Pat by himself. Leaving my two cousins in Moonta, he had moved to Broken Hill. Shane had told Mum that there may be woe. Had grown up in Broken Hill. Her parents were quite wealthy and owned the largest motel in town. Her father was an ex-miner. He had bought the house she was living in for her. Shane had met Donna 6 months previously when he first moved to town. Their relationship seemed like it wasn't going to last. She was friendly enough, but I got the feeling she really didn't want me there, was tolerable because of Shane. Broken Hill itself when I first arrived reminded me of Kalgoorlie, as they are both mining towns, Kal being a bit larger in population. To me, both towns have similar architecture, heaps of corrugated iron houses, heaps of hotels and workers' clubs. We started drinking at a shearer's pub in town, I think it was called the West Darling Hotel, one big time on the pokies there shortly after arrival.
This is all got to be edited to this bit here, you know, Donna Duna, I don't know why the hell I spelled it bloody Duna, but anyway, that's just my spelling. I've never been able to spell properly.
Basically, I liked the town, but after only 2 weeks at Duna's, things were running a bit thin with her. She wanted me out. I had been sitting around waiting for the start of work, hopefully, as there was no job for me yet. The start of the shearing season was starting in a week. Pat had work going that was going to last for the next 3 months. Shane had the previous season worked in this team, where he had stuck up a friendship with 2 of the shearers in the team, who had both been working for Pat since they first started shearing. In their early 20s had learned to shear under Pat. The 2 of them had just arrived at Donna's place where I was introduced. Peter and Head were their names. Peter was friendly, Head was very standoffish. I didn't know at the time that I would become good friends with both of them, especially Head.
Yes. Ed was just, big dude. They're both really big guys, really, And he's like this big fucking fat Viking in his fucking bluey singlet, this huge beard. Anyway, I mean, we became pretty good friends in the end.
Stated in Perth Story Part 1, I had done shed work previously as a roustabout down south of Western Australia, but hadn't done it for years. I wasn't looking forward to it as I was very unfit. The day before they were about to leave for the first shed, there was still no job for me. Fuck, they were all leaving. There's no way I can stay here with Donna. Shane suggested I just come with them as something may come up. Just a bit of information on shearing work and conditions. There's 2 ways of doing the work. 1, they call camp out sheds where the shed is that far out of town. The farmer supplies shearers' quarters. You stay at the farm whilst doing the job. The other way being the farm is closer to town, so you drive to and from the farm without having to stay. The only problem with the second alternative, usually it added at least 2 hours onto each day traveling to and from the farm you are working at. You don't get paid for the travel time. Plus it's a long day in the shed. You work what they call runs. The first run is 2 hours, then half an hour break, 2 more hours, then lunch break an hour, then.
Yeah, it's a long old day in the fucking shearing shed, that's for sure. Guess the Labor Party was formed in a shearing shed in Australia, so there you go. Not real bad.
4, it makes for a long day. And hey, I wasn't even shearing. The real hard job. Back-breaking. All of the sheds Pat was doing were camp-out sheds. One other thing is the way the shed is designed. It seemed to me that a lot of the sheds in the New South Wales were what's called a long board, where the design of the shed is one long area where the shearers do the shearing, with the pens holding the sheep to be sheared across from them. Creating a long board which as a roustabout made the job harder, as the shearers were constantly crossing into the pens to grab more sheep to shear. The other style of shed design is called an open board, which in my opinion, is the better design. With an open board, the area where the shearers work is open to walk up to, with the pens behind where they shear, giving the roustabout more room to pick up the fleece. Also, the shearers walk straight behind them to get the sheep to be sheared without crossing the path of the roustabout. There's also a third design which is called a raised open board, which is a more modern design. Generally, I think the older sheds were mainly all long boards. A lot of the sheds I had worked in decades before in southern Western Australia were open board sheds, so working on long boards was going to make things a bit more difficult. Footnote: I am working on another book, The History of Australian Shearing.
Anyway, I'll just close up with where we went, Monday Station. I reckon he'll have
First shed was at a station just out of a small settlement from Broken Hill, a place named Silverton, which is just a pub and a few other buildings. When we first pulled up at the pub there, I got distinct deja vu. As soon as I entered the pub, I discovered why. It has been the location for countless Australian films and beer commercials over the years. Apparently the light out there is perfect for filming, and it's a nice pub. The station was out of Silverton. It's called Mundi Mundi Station, which is situated on Mundi Mundi Plain, sort of like Mad Max country. There was an excellent lookout overlooking the whole plain. Off I went with Shane, Peter, and Head. There was still no work available for me. I was just having to see what happened when we got there. On arrival, Pat informed Shane he had enough shed hands, but if I wanted to help, I could work for just food for the first week, no pay, which I.
Yes, well, what else was I going to do?
First shed was at a station just out of a small settlement from Broken Hill, a place named Silverton, which is just a pub and a few other buildings. When we first pulled
getting it a bit mixed up. Anyway, keep rolling, I guess. Hopefully you're still there. How's everything going on today?
First week. Mundi station back in the day was quite a bit larger than it is today, but it was still the biggest shed I had done. It was an 8 stand, which means 8 shearers. The most I had done back west was a 5 or 4 stand.